China says efforts to expand the AUKUS security pact will destabilize Asia and the Indo-Pacific. Hello, I'm Arnold Nino, and this is The Heat. AUKUS, the security alliance formed by Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States, is reaching out to other nations, including Japan, South Korea, New Zealand and Canada. China has stated its opposition to the trilateral accord since its inception back in 2021. This week, Beijing again spoke out against the partnership.
The AUKUS nuclear submarine cooperation undermines efforts to maintain regional peace and security. The three countries have put together AUKUS trilateral security partnership to advance collaboration on nuclear submarines and other cutting-edge military technologies. This move has exacerbated arms race, impacted the international nuclear non-proliferation regime, instigated bloc confrontation, and jeopardized regional peace and stability.
So would expansion of AUKUS bring regional instability, and what impact might it have on global security? Well, there is much to talk about. To discuss that and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us here from New York rather, is Zongyuan Zoe Liu, is the Maurice R. Greenberg Fellow of China Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. From Shanghai, we're joined by Josef Gregory Mahoney. He is a professor of politics and international relations at East China Normal University. From New York, we're joined by Brian Becker. He is the director of the Answer Coalition and host of the Socialist program podcast on Breakthrough News. And from Beijing, we're joined by Victor Gao. He is chair professor at Soochow University. Welcome to all of you. Victor Gao, AUKUS was launched in September of 2021. It's been described as a trilateral security partnership for the Indo-Pacific, and its members are Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. What do you believe is the purpose of AUKUS? I mean, who's threatening whom here?
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, this AUKUS agreement is literally a transfer of nuclear weapons technology by the United States and United Kingdom to Australia. Of course, they are allies with each other, but Australia for many decades has prided itself for being nuclear free and also being part of the nuclear free zone in South Pacific. Now, by arming Australia with nuclear submarine, they say it is nuclear powered submarine. They say it is not nuclear weaponized submarine. But the real difference is really like splitting of hair, because this nuclear powered submarine can actually fire nuclear bombs or nuclear torpedoes. No one is going to verify what kind of weapon it is going to launch. And a nuclear-powered submarine in time of war is a nuclear weapon in itself, because if it is attacked, it will cause a nuclear explosion anyway. Therefore, I think the real essence of this thing is the transfer of nuclear power weapon technology to Australia, depriving Australia as a nuclear-free country and depriving the South Pacific as being the nuclear-free zone. This is very dangerous. This is not child's play. And in the real essence for these three countries, it is really a ripping off of Australia by countries like the United States and United Kingdom, because this is not going to generate any real benefit for the people of Australia. It is really hijacking the Australian people onto this bandwagon of war and aggression, for example, and destabilization in Asia Pacific. I would say people here in Asia Pacific, we want to have peace rather than an arms race or an escalation of tension in our region.
Zongyuan Zoe Liu, great to have you with us on the show. Welcome. We've heard the concerns there expressed by Victor Gao about what AUKUS means and what it's about. And as he pointed out, it's about the transfer of military technology, in this instance, nuclear-powered submarines, other nuclear technology as well. I mean, there is already a nuclear-powered submarine deal that's in the works, under which Australia will buy United States-made submarines. China, of course, has expressed deep concerns over these developments and has expressed those concerns on several occasions. They did so again. Let's take a listen to what the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman had to say.
If the three countries insist on advancing their nuclear submarine cooperation, it will create significant risk of nuclear proliferation and have profound negative impacts on resolving other regional hotspot nuclear issues.
So what is your response to that? And, does China have a point that this could lead to nuclear proliferation in the region?
First of all, and thank you so much for having me. Let me, take a step back by walking us very quickly through the, two different pillars of AUKUS. The first pillar is exactly as Victor mentioned. It's really it involved Australia's replacement of its previously diesel-powered submarine and using a nuclear-powered submarine. And then the second pillar is actually really designed for enhancing the interoperability of the three countries, three members. So from that perspective, I would say that joint development and R&D, these are not necessarily going against AUKUS original design. And if it relates to nuclear-powered submarine and related to technology, it's very much within the original framework.
Right, but does it actually lead to nuclear proliferation in that part of the world? I mean, could it lead to a nuclear arms race?
From that perspective, I guess I'm not as concerned as Victor in the sense that, again, the United States is very much a pillar and a member and archholder of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Agreement.
Josef, Gregory, Mahoney, this is the latest in what has been a series of actions that have been taken mainly by the United States against China. A lot of those have concerned trade and the economic relationship. Now we're looking at this, which is the defense relationship. I mean, would it be fair to say that AUKUS is just another component of what has been an escalating effort by the United States to contain China, to try and block its emergence as a major international power?
The U.S. is leveraging its position as the world's leading economy, world-leading oil producer, world-leading food exporter. It has the most powerful military, including an unmatched ability to project force globally. It controls the value of the supranational currency used in most global trade and has almost unilateral control over key infrastructure in the global financial system. And what we have seen, certainly since the end of the Second World War, is a clear pattern of the U.S. using these powers, which have waxed and waned, but more or less the U.S. has been preeminent to ensure that it remains at the top internationally. And one can well argue that this trend had earlier beginnings when the U.S. began to move decisively in the 19th century to establish itself as a regional hegemon, and then its gradual emergence as a major power. And of course, this trend did not end with the collapse of the Soviet Union. It continued to accelerate. We have seen certainly sort of a culture of continuous war. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, we've seen the United States expanding NATO, baiting Russia into a conflict in Ukraine, and now doing something similar in Asia against China. Now, Biden has made it clear many, many times that China will not surpass or will not be able to challenge the United States on his watch. And his ambassador to Japan has been very explicit, Rahm Emanuel, that the real goal here is to isolate China. So this is very deliberately a containment policy. AUKUS is one part of it, but it includes many other elements that are trying to push China back and push China down in order to maintain U.S. imperial power globally.
Brian, as we heard, there are many components to this AUKUS relationship, pillars, as Zongyuan Zoe Liu pointed out a moment ago. The pillar one is about that nuclear-powered submarine deal. Pillar two is about military technology, things like AI, quantum technologies, cyber warfare, undersea capabilities, as well as hypersonic weapons. But if we look at this, it's not very different from the kind of relationship that the United States has with its NATO partners in Europe, is it? I mean, in effect, is this an Asian NATO that we're seeing here?
Yes, NATO's going global. as you can see, both South Korea and Japan on the sidelines of recent NATO meetings. This is, as Victor said, I think partly to overcome the desire of the people of Australia to be independent and to be neutral as a country in the Pacific, to overcome the nuclear-free desires of the people that have gone on for generations. I'd have to disagree with your other guests about the U.S. adherence to the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. I would say the U.S. is the main violator in the world today of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which insists that all the major nuclear powers step by step gradually get rid of their nuclear weapons as the quid pro quo with other nations not acquiring nuclear weapons. And the U.S. has now moved into a fourth generation of nuclear weapons, modernizing nuclear weapons, which started under Obama. And then you create all of these new regional and sort of networking into global military alliances, all of which are really under the control of the United States. And even as South Korea moves possibly into AUKUS, you have the South Korean military, which really does not have sovereignty. In the case of conflict, the U.S. assumes command and control over the South Korean military. So this is going to be perceived and is perceived by the People's Republic of China as containment, as a provocation, as unnecessary, as gratuitous. But China will try to find countermeasures. And so we're climbing the escalation ladder. And again, almost without debate in the United States, which makes it even worse, because this should be a matter of great concern. The possibility that an arms buildup could lead to some sort of clash, conventional weapons or nuclear weapons, that should be a preeminent concern for people in Congress and the U.S. media, but there's virtual silence about it.
Right. Victor, you were talking a moment ago about this deal under which Australia will buy these nuclear-powered submarines from the United States. This is what the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi had to say about that.
Pacific Island countries are the home of the people of this region. They are not the backyard of any major country. The AUKUS partnership, made up of the U.S., UK, and Australia, insists on introducing nuclear submarine development to this region, which violates the principles of the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone Treaty and has caused serious nuclear proliferation risks.
So, Victor, how great are the risks of there being some kind of nuclear arms race, nuclear proliferation in this part of the world?
I would say the risk is huge. Allow me to mention one thing. Here in China, we follow the philosophy that don't do unto others what you do not want others do unto you. Therefore, just follow this AUKUS model. If, for example, eventually you think about countries like Argentina, Venezuela, Cuba, for example, do the same similar AUKUS model, bringing in nuclear submarines to that part of the world. Do you think that will make the United States happier, safer? No. The America will rise up in protest and rebel against this kind of new arrangement in the Atlantic region, for example, very close to the United States. However, if the United States really push in that dangerous direction, you never know. This may happen in the future. If you say AUKUS is a legitimate model of transferring nuclear weapon technology from one or two countries to another country. And for AUKUS itself, regional countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, etc., they are concerned. They may want to have similar structures and similar deals. They may want to acquire nuclear submarines, for example. And the consequence of all this is that you may actually get a situation getting out of control, more nuclear weapon technology pushing to different parts of the world, and then Asia-Pacific region, which has been peaceful since the United States ended the Vietnam War in the 1970s, may actually plunge into chaos, confrontation, war, etc. What is the good of this? What does the United States really gain from this if the United States believes that arming Australia with nuclear weapons will be, for example, contributing to the overall US strategy of contain China? The philosophical point is that we should never contemplate a war between China and the United States. The war between China and the United States will be suicidal. Eventually, it will be catastrophic. And if war really breaks out between China and the United States, to bind Australia onto the bandwagon of the United States or not is not the most consequential thing. It will not change the final analysis of the situation. Of crucial importance in the world of today is for China and the United States to get along with each other rather than scheming to grapple the other side onto the ground as if there will be no consequences. War is a dead end to start with. So don't push in that direction. And peace is the inevitable peace between China and the United States. We need to really promote peace rather than agitating for war.
Zongyuan, Zoe Liu, Victor Garr makes some very pertinent points there and also talks about the risks that are inherent in what AUKUS is trying to do right now. But what does this do to the strategic balance of power in the Asian region if AUKUS continues to do what it's doing right now?
First of all, let me echo what Victor mentioned as in terms of the importance of U.S.-China relationship stability, and both sides really need to do their own in terms of de-escalating tensions. And I would have to say that since President Biden and President Xi Jinping's summit in San Francisco, we have seen a lot of progress in terms of putting guardrail and stabilizing bilateral relationship from including military-to-military exchanges and on top of others, right? So a direct answer to your question in terms of changing the regional balance of power, I would have to admit that the regional balance of power has already changed economically and strategically, with the rise of China being the second largest economy and one of the most innovative countries in the world. And you see, at least viewing from, I understand that viewing from Beijing's point of view, AUKUS and IPEF, these might be the mirror image of each other in terms of content. But I think the Biden administration has communicated very clearly and very loudly, none of this aims to contain China. Instead, a lot of this is really reflecting upon a lot of U.S. domestic issues. And in particular, this is an election year, while AUKUS is not necessarily an election issue. But you started to see recently there is a bipartisan bill introduced by members including Senator Mitt Romney in terms of engaging Japan. So in other words, I think given that the regional balance of power has already changed, and from U.S. point of view, China has the fundamental perspective has changed in terms of China becoming this strategic competitor. So from that point of view, AUKUS or not, it does not really make a huge difference, because from that point, things have changed. The relative balance of power has changed, and obviously, China, and in particular, in the past 10 years, China's attitude have also changed.
Right, just one point that you mentioned there, saying that a lot of this is driven by domestic politics in the United States in an election year. I mean, it's one thing to talk tough about China on the campaign trail. It's something very different when you're supplying another country very far away with nuclear-powered submarines, isn't it?
Well, I would say that a lot of this predate the election year, and also, again, the context of this. Yes, the context of AUKUS was about containing China's aggression in the region, as cited by some analysts. However, I would say that AUKUS is not a NATO defense pact, and even within AUKUS, members still subject to U.S. export controls and technology transfer. So from that perspective, despite that, people talk about the potential of nuclear technology proliferation. Again, given the strict restrictions within the United States in terms of even just a nuclear power export, the restrictions on sharing nuclear technology within AUKUS is not to the extent as my other panelists are concerned about.
All right, I want to talk about some of those restrictions. Josef, Gregory, Mahoney, it's not just China that's been expressing concerns over what's going on with AUKUS. They're very small countries in the Pacific, countries like Tuvalu, that have expressed concerns that these nuclear-powered submarines will be cruising the Pacific around these islands without advance consultation. And the U.S. has not guaranteed that Australia will have complete control over these submarines. I mean, these are valid concerns, aren't they? Is this just another major extension of U.S. military power into another part of the world?
Well, it's a good question, and we know that that there was in the last year or so a crash. An American nuclear power submarine crashed into a seamount in the South China Sea while it was on maneuvers, and this imperiled the entire region. So it's not just about whether or not these ships get into conflict or whether or not they spark a arms race. It's also the fact that they can crash or have their own failures. We've seen other failures of nuclear submarines with other countries in the past. And so this is a serious concern that we start driving these things around secretly, places where people aren't familiar, countries that aren't used to using them, and the potential for accidents. We can imagine, you know, these ships as like little Fukushimas sailing around the South Pacific, but also up into East Asia. And I think that's certainly something that is very concerning to the South Pacific, given their own history, their own negative history with nuclear testing, and their very strong desire and identity of being disassociated with those types of developments. But as to your other point, who controls? Now, we know that when the United States was expanding its advanced missile system into South Korea, which happened, which was an agreement struck under the Park administration in South Korea, that it was revealed that it would be controlled by the United States. As one of the other panelists noted, if there's a conflict in Korea, does Korea have sovereignty over its own forces, or does the United States command them? In the case of Australia, it's been raised that Australia, will have to pay for these weapons. This will certainly benefit the American defense industry, but maybe they won't be able to control them. They won't be able to decide when they can be deployed or how they're deployed. So who has sovereignty, who's getting paid, and who's on the front line and bearing the greatest risk? These are all questions.
Brian Becker, we often hear terms like interoperational capability, standardization. We hear that when the United States talks about NATO. I mean, to what extent is this yet another marketing and sales effort by the United States to sell its weapons, like submarines, like advanced technology, to export it around the world? I mean, are we looking at another bonanza for the U.S. arms industry, for arms dealers?
Undoubtedly. I mean, this is the biggest industry in the United States, really. $900 billion a year. Formally, it's really quite a bit more than that. Every year for so-called defense, ever since they renamed the Defense Department from the War Department after World War II. So it's a big bonanza, lots of contracts, and also contracts that are guaranteed. They're not in the marketplace. You absolutely, once you have these government contracts, have guaranteed profits. So that's one part of it. The second part is dependency. As NATO expanded to the east in Europe, in Eastern and Central Europe, or as the United States creates other military alliances, including technology transfer under the control of the United States, it creates dependency on the countries that have been added to any of these military alliances. So what the United States is also doing, in addition to the business element, which is not small, it's making sure that Australia in the future is part of an American sphere of influence, that Australia really has an existing codependency and plays a junior partner in the relationship, such that if Australia wants to have neutrality or have very excellent and good relations with the People's Republic of China, it becomes less and less possible because of its dependency and interoperability with the United States. So we have a situation where the United States really has an expanding business empire, an expanding profit motive, but also an expanding geostrategic relationship such that other countries limit their own sovereignty.
Victor Garr, there was a comment made recently by a senior United States official, a senior diplomat actually. His name is Kurt Campbell, and he recently said that the submarines these are the submarines that are being sold to Australia, would have, quote, enormous implications in a variety of scenarios, including in cross-strait circumstances. What do you make of that kind of language?
This is very revealing of the real intention of the U.S. administration of what they are up to in dealing with China. And this does not bode well, because it seems that either Mr. Campbell or other colleagues in the U.S. government or their leaders are really contemplating a war against China. And I think the fact that they are indulging in that fantasy means they are losing their sanity, because a war between China and the United States should not be contemplated, because it will be Armageddon for mankind. And does anyone like Mr. Campbell or anyone else in Washington really believe that they will be able to create a situation where the war between China and the United States will be one-sided, leading to complete destruction of one side and the complete non-consequential for the other side? No, it's not possible. A war breaking out between China and the United States will be mutually destructive. And both China and the United States and all the other countries, including countries like Australia, should do our best to prevent a war between China and the United States, rather than creating situations which may lead toward greater possibility and probability of a war between China and the United States. You talked about this AUKUS. I'm really thinking, if eventually some country says, well, let me do the same AUKUS deal with Cuba, and let's enable Cuba to acquire nuclear submarine, have a nuclear base in Havana, for example, I can bet with you, Washington will be completely up in arms against that, because they will say this threatens the survivability and the safety, security, sovereignty, territorial integrity of the United States. We will do whatever we can to prevent that from happening. They will do exactly what President Kennedy did in the 1960s. Therefore, use your mind to think about geopolitics interactively rather than one-dimensionally. I now hope Mr. Campbell will be more interactive rather than one-dimensional.
Okay, and I'm afraid that's where we are going to have to leave it. We have run out of time. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.